Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we're about to uncover something super fascinating, the hidden architecture behind modern tech entrepreneurship. You know, we hear about these massive startups and overnight tech billionaires literally all the time. But where do these innovators actually come from? Like, how do you systematically train someone to just build the future? Well, today we're diving into some incredible academic research that maps out exactly how combining design, engineering, and business inside a university setting creates the absolute ultimate fuel for tech startups. Let's get into it.
So think about this. What is the actual secret ingredient for a successful tech startup today? Is it just a random stroke of genius in a garage, or is it something that can actually be taught and cultivated? To figure that out, we're going to take a little journey. We'll start by zooming way out, looking at global economic theory to see how the world's economy fundamentally shifted. And then we're going to zoom all the way in to one specific engineering campus in Chile to see how real, actionable skills are being forged right now to build the ultimate modern founders.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the macro shift from Fordism to knowledge. Then we'll define exactly what technology-based ventures are. Next up, we'll look at a new university paradigm, specifically zooming in on design engineering. And finally, we'll break down the networks, projects, and success traits that bring it all together.
All right, Section 1, from Fordism to knowledge.
To really get what's happening today, we've got to look back at how the whole global way of working completely flipped. I mean, we are not working the same way our grandparents did, right? The economy simply doesn't reward the same stuff anymore. For decades, the world ran on what's called the Fordist model. Picture a classic, massive assembly line, heavy mechanization, everything standardized, and the promise of a super secure, clock-in, clock-out kind of job. But starting around the 1980s, that shifted toward the knowledge economy. Suddenly, the system demanded flexibility, nonstop innovation, and heavily networked jobs. The research points out that this shift basically dismantled those old, rigid employment structures and paved the way for creative industries. Producing intellectual property and working together in networks, that became the real way to generate wealth.
Take a look at this quote from Julio Mende that the research highlights. It perfectly shows how in this brand new economy, design wasn't just some fringe, artsy endeavor anymore. No, it became a core economic driver. Creativity and design totally fused with consumption. It was no longer just about making sure a machine worked. It was about creating complex value, building a brand, and designing an entire user experience for a global market. It was a total game changer.
Moving right along to Section 2, technology-based ventures.
So in a world where knowledge and design are basically the new capital, what kind of businesses actually survive and thrive? Well, this is where we meet a very specific type of organization that countries all over the world are absolutely desperate to build. Enter the EBT, or Empresa de Base Tecnológica. In English, that's a technology-based venture. Now, the source material draws a super distinct line here. An EBT is not just a company that happens to use a lot of tech, like, an accounting firm that buys the latest laptops. Not at all. EBTs are intensive users of knowledge that actually generate new technology and innovation. They are the active creators, taking hardcore science or technical advancements and using them to build completely new products or manufacturing processes.
When you look at their key traits, it makes sense why they're so sought after. They systematically apply science and tech, and they create truly innovative products. But really look at those last 2 points from the research. EBTs actually have remarkably high survival rates compared to your run-of-the-mill traditional startups. And on top of that, they have spectacular growth potential, especially when it comes to creating high-quality jobs and boosting exports. Seriously, these companies are the absolute engines of the modern knowledge economy.
Which brings us to Section 3, a new university paradigm.
Okay, so if the whole global economy shifted and EBTs became the new gold standard, how on earth did the educational system respond? To understand the massive pressure put on universities, we need to trace Chile's economic history. The source text outlines this incredibly rapid, structural transformation. Back in the 1970s, Chile had a very inward-looking economy, focused on domestic markets with heavy state regulation. But by the 1980s, that shifted dramatically. They moved to a liberalized, export-driven model fueled by privatization. And then, by the 1990s, the focus evolved again into deep internationalization. They desperately needed innovation just to compete on the global stage. I mean, the country literally went from exporting a few hundred products to thousands, practically overnight. Because of all this, universities basically faced an existential crisis. They had to adapt or become irrelevant. The old-school model of just transmitting established step-by-step knowledge to students so they could go get safe, predictable corporate jobs, that model was completely dead. This new, hyper-competitive global market demanded something entirely different. Universities had to totally transform into active incubators. They needed to start reinforcing entrepreneurial skills and actually teaching students how to build these EBTs from scratch.
And that takes us to Section 4, Design Engineering. Now we're zooming all the way in to look at one specific, brilliant response to this crisis, a highly unique university program in Valparaiso, Chile, that basically nailed this new educational mandate. The insights we're unpacking today come directly from a comprehensive doctoral thesis by Mario Doroceschi Fernandez. His research investigated 123 graduates from the Product Design Engineering program, or Ingeniería en Diseño de Productos, at the University Técnica Federico Santa María. He studied a full decade of graduates from 2006 to 2015. The whole goal of this incredibly detailed academic study was essentially to find the secret formula. Like, what specific traits actually led these graduates to successfully build tech startups in a modern economy?
But I want to humanize this data for just a second. When you look at the history here, it becomes super clear that massive educational shifts like this don't just happen by magic. They're driven by real people with a bold vision. This reveals the incredibly dedicated team of professors. We're talking designers, mechanical engineers, metallurgists, and mathematicians who spent years fighting against traditional academic boundaries. Starting way back in the late 1990s, they worked relentlessly to blend design, technology, and business into one single cohesive curriculum.
Check out the core DNA of this curriculum. It literally forces three totally distinct fields into direct dialogue with one another. You've got design, to really understand user needs and value creation. You've got technology, bringing the scientific rigor and manufacturing know-how. And finally, you've got business, to navigate the markets and figure out economic viability. By placing students smack in the middle of these three fields, they basically created the ultimate breeding ground for those highly valued EBTs we were talking about earlier.
Let's head into our final part, Section 5, Networks, Projects, and Success.
So, zooming into the exact micro-level skills and individual traits that make these graduates such successful tech founders, the thesis introduces this fantastic, kind of dense piece of academic terminology from sociology called grandezas. That translates roughly to qualities or magnitudes. But let's completely demystify that jargon. In the real world, grandezas are basically the highly actionable everyday skills that people use to navigate complex social networks and actually push projects forward. Because in the knowledge economy, you can't just boss people around. You have to build consensus and seamlessly weave a bunch of different strategies together.
The study actually pinpointed two vital grandezas that make up the ultimate formula for success for these founders. First up is connectionismo, or connectionism. Think of this as the superpower of networking. It's the ability to convene the right people and actually maintain those relationships over the long haul. The second one is mobilidad, mobility. But we're not just talking about physical travel here. It means deep adaptability, dynamism, and a capacity for what the text calls effervescence. I love that word. It's basically the high-energy drive to constantly adapt to wildly changing scenarios and keep a project alive against the odds.
So, how does the university actually teach connection and mobility? The answer is through projects. The research shows that project-based learning acts like a crucible. A tough project literally forces students into dialogue. It forces them to solve controversies. Because let's face it, rigid engineering constraints are always going to clash with wild design desires or tight business budgets. Having to navigate those real-world clashes builds absolutely vital communication skills. It fosters the co-creation of ideas, and ultimately, it transforms a standard student into a highly adaptable innovator who is actually ready for the real world.
So here is the absolute core takeaway from all this research. Successful technology-based ventures do not just magically spring from some lone, brilliant genius having a eureka moment in a garage. That's a myth. The data shows that they actually emerge from a highly complex web of social interactions, really specific learned qualities like connection and mobility, and dense supportive networks. At its core, tech entrepreneurship is a deeply relational process, and it is intrinsically tied to the educational environment that forged the founder.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought. Take a look at your own education, your own workplace, or even your daily routines. Are you being trained to memorize algorithms for an old industrial world that honestly just doesn't exist anymore? Or are you actively building the networks, the adaptability, and the cross-disciplinary skills required to actually thrive in the new knowledge economy? It's a massive question, and definitely one worth asking yourself today. Thank you so much for exploring this research with me, and keep innovating.